Babylonian mythology is one of the oldest of the world mythologies. Babylonian mythology, seen as a continuation of Sumerian mythology, is one of the most prominent mythologies of Mesopotamia, which were the most important gods of Babylonian mythology, named after the Babylonians, especially the Babylonian city god Marduk. According to the Babylonians, what was the earth like, and where would they live after death? Again, according to them, how was the world created? And Noah's flood as we know it? How did it happen according to Babylonian mythology? The answers to all these questions are in this documentary, the 6th installment of the Mythology Series. The Babylonians were so devoted to all the gods, especially the chief god Marduk, that Cyrus the Great's declaration that Marduk had come as a savior prevented the Babylonians from making a counter-move. So, let's examine the mythology and beliefs of the Babylonians, who were so devoted to their beliefs. The beliefs of the Babylonians actually date back to ancient times, even before the Sumerians lived. However, as we do not have much information about the first indigenous tribes, the Sumerians are accepted as the first inhabitants of Babylon. For this reason, the beliefs of the Babylonians were directly influenced by the beliefs of the Sumerians, that is, the Sumerian mythology. Thanks to some tablets found, it has been seen that the understanding of religion in the city of Babylon dates back to 6 or 7,000 BC. However, it is estimated to be much older. For this reason, the Babylonians were greatly influenced by the Sumerians in their religious beliefs, and the Babylonians, in turn, greatly influenced the Assyrians. Because the Assyrians had Babylonian religious beliefs, we now know much more about Babylonian mythology. This is because most of the inscriptions and tablets that have survived to this day belong to the Assyrians. These tablets contain many divine texts with titles and symbols attributed to the gods. This allows us to understand the relationships, ranks, and powers of the gods. It is also possible to draw up a complete outline of Babylonian mythology. The Babylonian gods had their own very distinct personalities. All the gods made skillful use of their superhuman powers. Although they did not appear to anyone, the gods were also thought to be in human form. They resembled humans not only in body, but also in thought and feeling. They were born, loved, fought, and died in the world, just like people. The Babylonians never believed that there could be a single supreme creator with a form so abstract and different from their own. They had written so many legendary stories about the gods that, according to these stories, some gods could be heroic and brave, while others could be greedy. Some could even be treacherous. In other words, the difference between a Babylonian and his gods lay in the rank of the class to which they belonged rather than in their creation. The reason for the emergence of gods is linked to the Babylonians' observation of nature. These people who saw the sun pass over their heads every day, observed the phases of the moon, felt the breeze of the wind, and feared storms, could not understand the laws of nature, so they interpreted these events as the work of beings similar to themselves, as did other primitive peoples. For this reason, we can see Babylonian mythology as a worship of nature. We can accept the gods as manifestations of natural events. In the early days, Babylon was a city-state, and its surroundings were full of city-states. In other words, there was no single large state. This led to the prominence of a different god in each city. For example, Enlil, the god of the earth, was worshipped in Nippur, Enki, the god of the seas, in Eridu, Sin, the god of the moon, in Ur, and Shamash, the god of the sun, in Larsa. Each city was happy to worship its god and fight in his honor. The fate of the god depended on the fate of the city. If the god fell, so did the city. If a coalition or unified state was formed between the cities, the god of the most dominant city had supremacy over the other gods. If we take a closer look at the Babylonian gods, first of all, we need to talk about the three main great gods whose sphere of influence covers the whole universe: Anu, Bel, and Ea. Anu was the god of the sky. Bel was the god of the earth and mankind. Ea was the god of the seas and oceans. We can think of these gods as the Babylonian version of the Sumerian gods, An, Enlil, and Enki. There were also separate temples for each of these three gods. The other three major gods of Babylon are: Sin was the moon god, Shamash was the sun god, and Raman was the air god. The moon god Sin was born of the earth god Enlil and his wife Ninlil. The sun god Shamash was the son of the moon god Sin. One of the most important gods not only in Babylon but in all cities was Sin, and he determined the fate of the people. Shamash, the sun god, was the god of justice, and justice was established by his hand. Raman, the god of the air, controlled the clouds, fog, rain, and wind. There were also gods such as Nergal, the god of war, and Ishtar, the goddess of war and love. But in the city of Babylon, alongside all these gods, a much greater god was worshipped. The god Marduk, the son of Enki, was recognized as the chief god of the city. He was declared the greatest of the gods in the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, and according to the epic, Marduk was also the patron god of Babylon. According to the Babylonians, Marduk was such a great god that he alone had all the characteristics of gods such as Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, and Ninurta. Marduk had supremacy over all the gods thanks to the successes of the Hammurabi period. The Babylonians believed that the wars and victories won were due to his bravery and service. Apart from all these gods, there were many other second-degree gods that were considered important. It was even believed that there were demons and jinns with different powers from the gods. An important part of Babylonian mythology is information about what the earth is like and what happens after death. According to an ancient Mesopotamian, the center of the earth was the high mountains of Iraq, surrounded by oceans. They also believed that before the creation of the earth there was nothing but water in which monsters lived. According to them, the god Bel or the god Marduk slaughtered a great female monster that lived in these waters and then created the firmament and the earth with the body of this slaughtered monster. Below this firmament, the stars and the moon god Sin moved on their own course. Furthermore, at each end of the firmament were two gates through which Shamash, the sun god, could pass from one end of the world to the other. This is how they explained day and night. The sun god Shamash would pass through the western gate, meet his wife at night to feast and rest. Beyond these gates lay a mysterious land of supernatural beauty and splendor. They called this realm the most special part of heaven. In reality, the gods lived on earth and in cities, each of which was considered sacred. But sometimes they went to this realm when they wanted to live apart from humans. Again, the assembly hall, where the gods made decisions, was on the easternmost Sunrise Mountain, closest to the seas on earth. But where was the land of the dead? The Babylonians thought that the earth was made of a very thick crust, and that deep in this crust there was a great cave called Aralu. Here was the house of the dead, surrounded by 7 walls. The walls were so strong, and the place so well guarded that no one who entered could ever come out again. The house of the dead was a dark and gloomy place. The dead lived a miserable life there. They never saw the light of day and lived in constant darkness. They were dressed in furry clothes. All they ate was dust and mud. Everything was covered with a thick layer of dust. The Babylonians had no hope of a happy life after death. They did not believe that there was a heaven where they would live a life like or better than the one they had lived on earth. Right or wrong, good or bad, rich or poor, everyone would be reduced to the same level, sharing the same fate. This sad land of the dead also had a goddess. Her name was Allatu. Nergal, the god of war, descended to the land of the dead to slaughter the goddess Allatu. But Allatu persuaded Nergal to spare his life and marry her. Thus, they began to rule the land of the dead together. Allatu also had a chief assistant. This demon, who spread disease and epidemics at his command, was called Namtar. Although the Babylonians believed that they would definitely go to the land of the dead after death, not to heaven, they attached great importance to funeral ceremonies. In fact, the greatest misfortune that could happen to a person was to be deprived of a funeral ceremony. In such a case, the soul would not be able to reach Aralu and would have to wander between the earth and the land of the dead. For this reason, it would starve constantly and try to make do with the scraps and rubbish it could find on earth. But not burying a corpse was dangerous for the living, for the spirit of the dead could wander about, bewitching and disturbing the people it met. For this reason, burials were very important, and even food and drink were placed in the graves of the deceased to give them strength and comfort in the gloomy environment of the land of the dead. Not only food and drink, but also silver and gold were placed in the tombs of kings. We also know from the book of HERODOTUS and some tombs that mummification was carried out with oil, salt, and honey, similar to the Egyptian practice. In some Babylonian tablets, we find two stories about the creation of the world, which are close to each other but have slight differences. According to the first story, there was an understanding of a universe in which nothing had been created and everything was covered with water. In this water lived creatures very different from the human form we know. For example, there were interesting creatures with 2 heads and 4 wings, one head being female and the other male. Some creatures had human-like bodies but goat-like feet and heads. On the other hand, there were creatures with a horse-like body and a human head. There were also reptiles, snakes, and many other monsters. All the creatures and monsters that lived in these waters were ruled by a woman called Omorka. There was great chaos here when the god Bel, or Enlil, slaughtered Omorka and other monsters. The god Bel then split Omorka's body in 2 and created the earth with one half and the firmament with the other. But when Bel realized that no one could live here because the earth was too dry, he made the other gods shed their blood to make the earth habitable, created animals and humans. Although this story is translated from the Babylonian tablets, it is closer to Sumerian mythology. I have already said that Babylonian mythology was influenced by Sumerian mythology. The other story is translated from the creation epic Enuma Elish. As in the previous story, the universe consisted of a watery mass. 2 creatures called Apsu and Tiamat lived in this water. Here, Tiamat is the equivalent of Omorka in the previous story. In time, gods began to be born out of the chaos of these waters. Tiamat, in the form of a gigantic serpent, disturbed by the birth of so many gods here over the centuries, rose up against the gods and created an army of monsters to destroy them. Anshar, one of the firstborn gods, sent first the god Anu and then the god Ea to fight Tiamat, but neither succeeded. He then persuaded Marduk, Ea's son, to become the best of the gods and fight the monsters. Anshar called all the gods to a council where they agreed to make Marduk the supreme god and asked all the gods to help Marduk in the war. Marduk finally confronted Tiamat and succeeded in killing her and capturing all her followers. He then split Tiamat in 2 and created the earth with one half and the firmament with the other. Finally, he created animals, plants, and humans and began life on earth. In both stories, it is clearly stated that the universe was first covered with water, that all creatures, including the main monster, were fought, and that the earth and the firmament were created from the body of this monster. The main difference here is that the creator god is Bel, the earth god in one story and Marduk in the other. This is because the first story is closer to Sumerian mythology and the second to Babylonian mythology. We have all heard, more or less, that the flood of Noah recreated mankind. This flood is described in detail in the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran. But did such a flood take place according to Babylonian mythology? Although there are differences not only in the Abrahamic religions, but also in many civilizations scattered around the world, we can learn from the archaeological remains of these civilizations that such a flood did take place. According to Babylonian mythology, such a flood took place during the reign of a king named Ziusudra, and even 10 Babylonian kingdoms ruled before this flood. According to the story, God Bel appeared to this king in a dream and warned him of a flood that would destroy all mankind. God Bel tells Ziusudra to write the history of the world from beginning to end and orders him to place these writings in the sun city of Sippar. He then tells him to build a great ship that will hold all his friends, relatives, birds, and animals. Ziusudra does as the god says, builds the ship, and the world is flooded. When the flood begins to recede, Ziusudra releases the birds from the ship to see if the water has receded. But the birds return because they cannot find a place to land. After a few days, he released the birds again, and this time they returned with muddy feet. When he released the birds again for the third time, they no longer returned. Then the king got off the ship and saw that they were on the slope of a mountain. Here he makes a sacrifice with his wife and relatives. The king and his 3 companions are immediately taken to heaven. Other people who got off the ship saw that King Ziusudra had disappeared and began to lament. The king never appears to these people again, but they are told by a voice that the king has now been taken to the gods and that they must carry out his orders. After this, people set out and came back again to find the texts hidden in Sippar and rebuild Babylon. Thus, Babylon becomes a city where people live again. A similar story was written by the Sumerians in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Babylonians attached great importance to this epic. So, we can learn from the Babylonians that such a flood also took place. In short, according to Babylonian mythology, the Babylonians believed in more than one god, but the most important one was Marduk, the Babylonian city god. They thought that after death, everyone would go to hell. They thought that the world was created by the destruction of an extraordinary creature by the gods. Finally, they spoke of a flood that would destroy humanity. Most importantly, how did the people living at that time know these things, or what caused them to have these myths?